Welcome everyone. Today we have Onintze as a speaker presenting her work entitled A Probabilistic Generative Model to Discover the Treatments of Coexisting Diseases with Missing Data.
Thank you. Good morning, I'm Onintze, as Andoni said, and I'm going to present a recent work that I have jointly done with my supervisors Aritz Perez and José Antonio Lozano, and in collaboration with Fakultatea. And the title of the work is The Probabilistic Generative Model to Discover the Treatment of Coexisting Diseases when we have missing data. The administrative department of Fakultatea of the Hospital of Cruces provided us with some electronic health records, and in particular with a data set of more than 80 million records that contain information about demographics, diagnosis, procedures, medication of the patient. This is an extraction of a fictitious patient, and we have each step that the patient does in the hospital. But the information that is contained in this data set is mainly billing data, so we don't have like laboratory results or vital signs to represent the treatment of patients. And a characteristic of this data set is that most of the diagnosis information is missing. And this is a problem when we want to model the treatment of patients that have comorbidities. That means that they have more than one coexisting disease at the same time. So we represent the treatment of a patient with the medical specialties that they attend in the hospital. So we have for each patient a sequence of such medical specialties chronologically ordered. And this kind of data provide us the opportunity of developing models to extract knowledge about the complex and heterogeneous dynamics of diseases. In the literature, these models are known as disease progression models, and they attempt to learn the underlying progression of treatments from observed data. But this task has some challenges such as limited data availability in the medical settings, the data quality problems such as missing data, the need for interpretable models for physicians, and the heterogeneity in the nature of diseases. And we will try to address all these challenges, but specifically the one of the missing data, as I have shown in the previous slide, in the diagnosing information. So most of the disease progression models are based on Markovian assumptions that, and specifically in hidden Markov models that try to model or to represent the observed data based on unobservable states. So in this kind of models, each action depends on a hidden state, and the hidden state on the previous hidden state. And the benefits of these models are that they can train using small data sets, they handle missing data, and they are interpretable models. So we can relate the inferred latent states with clinical meaningful variables. But most of the existing models ignore the joint progression dynamics of comorbidities and only model single disease trajectories. So our general objective is to model patients that have more than one disease at the same time. This led us to set our objective. As I have said, we want to build a comorbidity progression model to discover the evolution of treatments or of clinical histories of patients with different comorbidities, considering that we have missing diagnosis data. And to reach this objective, we have to follow 3 steps. The first one is to identify the diagnosis that is associated with the medical event or with the medical action, that in our case are medical specialties such as oncology or hematology, primary care. The second step is learn the underlying distribution of each disease. And finally, we want to discover the different subtypes of patients that have similar coevolution patterns of these treatments that are associated with different comorbidities. So we define the problem as an unsupervised classification of a set of clinical histories based on the different progression over time, the progression of the dynamics of comorbidities over time. So we define a clinical history of a patient as a sequence of hospital visits, and each hospital visit consists of a medical specialty that is observed and a diagnosis that in most of the cases is not observed because it's missing in the dataset. So we will have this sequence of medical action for each patient and its associated sequence of diagnosis that is partially observed. So as I have said, in some cases we have the diagnosis assigned, but the first idea is to estimate the diagnosis of those medical events that we don't know, and then learn the model of each disease. But we also have to consider that the evolution of the diseases can be different depending on the comorbidity, on the active comorbidities in each time. That means that, for example, a patient has 3 comorbidities and suddenly a new disease appears. So the evolution or the priority that a physician gives to this new disease is different, will change the progression of the other treatments. So maybe the physician will give more importance to this new disease or less to other ones. So we have to take into account that the distribution of the diseases will evolve over time also. So the proposal of our generative model is based on Markovian assumptions in the sense that in each time the variables depend on the previous time, and we will have the observed sequence of medical actions, and this observed sequence of medical action has a hidden structure of diagnosis. So we have to associate each diagnosis to each observed medical event, and we also have to take into account that the distribution of such diseases depend on another latent variable that are the active disease states, and this variable describes the presence or the absence of new or old diseases a long time. And finally, we define a class in order to get the heterogeneity of the different treatments or clinical histories of patients. And this will be the joint probability distribution of our sequence of actions, sequence of active diseases, diagnosis, and class. So for the activation of a patient, we can see here that this sequence that gives us which are the set of diseases that are active in time t depends on the previous time t, on the previous disease, and on the previous medical action. And then with this term is how we model the different distribution of diseases that depend on which are the diseases that are active in this moment. And finally, we have this last term where medical actions depend on the previous medical actions, but this medical action must be the same disease, and that's what these lines represent. So in other way, we have like imagine we have 2 diseases and we have 2 treatments, each one for each disease, and we have this treatment mixed in a way that they constitute the whole medical history. So we need to disentangle these 2 treatments and model and have a model for each of the diseases. And to learn this model, we have to maximize this log likelihood. With this second term, we make all the sequences of actions contribute equally to the model regardless of the length, because we have each clinical history has a different length. And to learn these parameters, we use an iterative EM algorithm, where in the E step we have to consider all the possible configurations of the latent diseases and classes, and this requires an exponential number of computations. So we proposed a dynamic programming method to compute these probabilities in a polynomial time. And the main idea of this method is to, for each time t, instead of computing one by one each possible configuration, we compute the sum of all the possible sequences of diseases that in time t have a disease d. And in this way, we reduce it to polynomial time. And then with these probabilities, we are able to update the parameters in an iterative way in the M step of the algorithm. To validate our model, we use two sets of experiments. The first one are synthetic data experiments, and we use it to evaluate the ability of our learning algorithm to recover the original generative model underlying the data. And we did it by using different sample sizes data sets. And in these two plots, what we try to do is to show that as the number of the data set size increases, the curve that represents the fitting and the generalization of our learned model convert to the original ones. So in this way, we can conclude that we are able to reach to the original model. The second set of experiments are with real world data. We use the data from the Hospital of Cruces, and we use the breast cancer and cardiovascular diseases comorbidities. So in this data set, we have the 90% of diagnosis available. So the rest, I mean the 80% of diagnoses are missing. And we learn the model with those 90% of diagnosis, and then we consider two classes, and for each of the classes we simulate with samples 1,000 clinical histories. So the darker part of the plot is the probability of having breast cancer medical events, and the lighter one are the probability of having cardiovascular disease events. So we can see that we get two different classes. In both of them, the dominant disease is breast cancer, but in this first class, we can see that the cardiovascular events remains constant in time, and in this second class, we can see that in the initial part, we have more probability of having a cardiovascular disease event. So we define these two classes. The first one as patients with maybe previous cardiovascular risk factors that need routine monitoring of the cardiovascular diseases, and the second one as patients that, because of the anti-cancer therapies, they may have harmful effect in the cardiovascular system, and that's why the probability of having cardiovascular disease events is higher in this initial part. And a second experiment on real data is the segmentation of clinical history. So here we tried for each individual assigned to each medical event which is the associated disease, and in this way to segment the two and get the two different treatments. The bold I don't know if you can see, but the bold medical specialties are those that have the diagnosis in the data set, and the other one is the one that we assign. So for example, here the radiology event is assigned to breast cancer, then the cardiology one is to the cardiovascular disease, and in this way we obtain the different treatments for each individual. So in conclusion, we developed the novel probabilistic generative model that, as we have seen, is able to segment the medical history of a patient into different treatments that are associated, each one to a different comorbidity. And the model is also able to classify patients that have similar coevolution patterns of the treatments associated to different comorbidities. The model is well suited to the scenario where we have coexisting diseases and the diseases evolve differently depending on the active diseases in each time or in each moment. The generative model can accurately estimate the diagnosis of medical records. We did a cross-validation experiment also. We obtained an area under the curve of 0.8. So we can see it as a tool for the imposition of diagnosis. And as a future work, we plan to include also the time in this model in order to get a more informative model and more informative results. That's all.
Thank you, Onintze. Now it's time for questions, so if anyone has one.
Thank you. I have some questions, but I think it's perhaps I didn't understand well. So if you could go please to the previous slide.
Which one?
This one.
Ah, sorry.
What does it mean to estimate the diagnosis of medical records? What does it mean exactly?
Okay. Yes. To assign the real or the diagnosis that should be in the data set in such medical record, because a lot of records that we have don't have a diagnosis assigned. So we try to assign or to give a reason of such medical record.
And related to this, in the beginning you mentioned something about, for example, how is the diagnosis defined? Because you mentioned sometimes that depending on the treatment you took or you decided on the diagnosis, it was like that or was something different? In the very first initial, that if the patient went to radiology or to cardiology, then it was assumed that it has a...
Yes.
Yes. And is this the same of diagnosis or not? Diagnosis is the same?
Yes, yes, yes.
And for instance, in the case of radiology, actually when you have radiology, you don't have a diagnosis. This is a test. In that case, is this considered to be a diagnosis?
Yes, we want to relate this medical event to a diagnosis, for example, to estimate then the cost of the whole treatment. So the thing is that they don't know if the administrative department of the hospital don't know which is the reason of each of the medical records. And maybe they want to estimate the cost of breast cancer, but they have a lot of mixed medical records and they want to know which are the ones that are really from breast cancer. So if we assign a diagnosis to each of these medical events or each record, we can like extract the treatment and, okay, this is the cost of the treatment of breast cancer.
Diagnosis and disease,
yes, it's the same.
It's a synonym. Okay, so when she talks about diagnosis, it means disease.
And only disease, not a treatment, not the same of
no.
Radiology is...
No, radiology it's a medical action. So we have medical actions that it can be radiology, it can be go to a consultation, to a primary care. It can be take blood sample. So any action in the system is an action, and each action is related with one disease, but we don't know in advance. I mean, we have the information from for some of them, but for most of them the information is missing. So what you would like is to be able to assign for each action in the system to assign a disease. In this way, you have all the action that has been taken for a disease. You can know the cost of the treatment of the patient for this disease.
Okay, so for a sequence of actions, you would like to know whether the person had cancer.
That's it.
Okay. And just another stupid question: why generative? Why is the model generative?
Because, for example, we sample the class from a multinomial, then we sample which are the comorbidities that are active in a time t. then we will sample the disease and then the action. And then we go to the next time. And we sample the new disease, if there is a new disease that will be active or not, then we sample and in this way we create the whole clinical history considering the medical actions, the diseases, and the sequence that show us which are active in time T or not.
Okay, thank you. I have another question, but I will wait just somebody else wants. I ask about the generative because now in neural networks you see a lot of generative models where you basically don't have to assume don't have to make assumption about any distributions of the data. So in this case, actually two questions. Why did you decide on these distributions for your generative models, and what did you consider a model like a neural network where you have your sequences and you could apply a recurrent neural network or something that could predict the disease?
The reason of not using deep learning methods are because we need interpretable models for the administrative staff, and also because we have 80 million records, but for example, for breast cancer and cardiovascular diseases, we only have 90 patients. So, yes, it's not too much. So, yes. Yes. So,
why these distributions?
The class, we select the class for a multinomial. Then, and the other ones are categorical. This one is a vector of zeros and ones, that means which are active. So we select one of, we have different combination of active and not active, and we select one. Then the diseases, because we have the set of diseases, and we select categorically one. And finally, the action that are also discrete data.
Okay. No, I thought that maybe, a priori some relationship between the diseases, some conditional dependencies that you could exploit at the time of defining these distributions.
In each of these distributions, we are able to get information from the previous time.
Okay.
So basically, what we do was to formulate a model that had some logic for us. That makes sense. For instance, the model doesn't allow that two diseases appear at the same time. So at each point in time, only one disease can incorporate, or only one disease can disappear. Or, we try to, of course, we thought in the way that the sequence could be generated, and we tried to create a model that at some point reflects the logical of the data.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks for the explanation. I actually had a similar comment, because you're talking about comorbidities, yet at each time instant there's only one disease that can happen.
Yes.
So
in each time T, yes.
Only one disease can
appear, yes.
Yes.
So you have several diseases
active, yes.
At the same time.
At the sequence level, but not at the time level.
No, at the time, no.
Yeah, but at each point in time, imagine you have, now the patient has two diseases, okay? And now a new activity in the medical, a new medical action appears. So this new activity can be from the previous diseases, or it can be from a new disease. So you can incorporate a new disease, and then the patient would be three diseases.
But I think that you mean that in each time you only can extract one disease.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. you can only sample in each time t, you can sample only one disease, no like 3 diseases, even if you have other ones active.
So if at each time instant I only have one disease, and then that disease determines the next state, how?
No,
yes.
that way. I mean, the set of diseases determines the next.
Yes, but also the disease, because we do that because we need to know when the disease will disappear. I mean, here, if we have the disease D, then here we will be able to remove this disease. That's why this depends on also on the disease, the active diseases.
Exactly. So
yes.
So you make one disease disappear.
Yes.
So how do you make sure they can appear again? Because
it cannot appear again. Once the disease is removed, cannot appear again.
Well, but then it's not a comorbidity, right?
Why not?
Because if I have a disease at some point, then
yes.
you are forcing the model to not let it appear again in the future.
No, but is there
no.
Yeah.
Is in the
Yeah, exactly. But that's not how diseases occur, right? Like if I have breast cancer at time t, I'm very likely to keep having it at t plus 10.
Yes, 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 and you are able to get it again, because the breast cancer will be active in this sequence of in this one.
So you can have many times in which you have breast cancer. I mean, imagine you are at some time breast cancer appears. Then you have breast cancer for many actions in the system.
Yeah.
But then breast cancer disappears because imagine that for I don't know for 6 months we haven't had any action related with breast cancer.
Yeah.
We decide okay, this action breast cancer has disappeared, and we don't allow breast cancer to occur again. Okay, this is one of the constraints of the system. One of the
you don't. Or you do?
Breast cancer cannot occur anymore. So you have breast cancer for some time, but
yes.
then when breast cancer finishes, you cannot have breast cancer again.
Imagine here, suddenly a cardiovascular disease appears, but here, even if these are breast cancer related events, this one can still be active. And imagine that appears here, then can be removed.
Okay. Okay. I'm just kind of surprised that they can reappear again. But I trust you. Like you've done the work, so I trust you. Thank you.
No, they can't. I mean, in a more general model, we could allow some disease to appear and disappear. That's really. I mean,
when we say that they appear, it's like a medical event related to the breast cancer has happened. No, yes. Okay.
Like COVID, that could be sometimes disappear, and sometimes you can get it several times.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, but this is. I mean, this is more for well. Yeah. No, that's a good example. Yeah. We don't allow
that. Another question, what are the implications of the Markovian property for the model? What the implications of assuming a Markovian property for the model?
Why we assume a Markovian properties? Because
once you have assumed, what does it mean for what you can model or not to model?
Sorry, I don't.
What are the implications in the model of assuming a
that
Markovian?
Okay, for example, the actions, we want to get information from previous actions and construct the whole sequence of medical action, and that's why we use this property. So we want to model the temporal evolution of the treatments, and the way we model this temporal evolution is using the Markovian properties that gets the information from the previous state or previous time. It's yes.
I would say it's more just the opposite, that once you assume the Markovian, you are forgetting about the
Yes,
history
yes.
and just taking the last.
Yes.
But does it have any serious implication for the quality of the modeling, or?
Yes, for sure. I mean, we would like to get the information from the start, but this is then in the learning algorithm, it will be like
Too hard.
a disaster. Yes.
Yeah, in fact, I mean, if you don't do from Markovian perspective, learning would be really
Yes, very hard.
but it has another, I mean, one of the problems is that, of course, you are forgetting that, of course, this sequence of 5 actions could imply another sequence. You're only taking the previous one into account. But the one important thing is that when you simulate these models, the fact that it's Markovian is the fact that the model is Markovian makes the problem that when you, I mean, while the first actions that you simulate are okay, the last action, once you commit a mistake, the last actions they are completely chaos. And we have seen one paper published in Untitled, I think, where they try to mix the Markovian model, the autoregressive model, with a model that takes into account all the history. But I mean, the way in which they do it's a little bit weird and not very elegant, and it seems a really open problem. It's not easy to solve.
I'm sorry, I was just curious about this.
Thank you.
Thank you. But let me understand something. When you assume Markovianity, so your present state does depend only on the previous. But when you are assuming that the relationship between actions and the archive, and you are archiving in some sense the diseases, it's like overcoming the Markovianity in some sense. Is that? Yeah.
Yes.
So you have information, previous information, and this allows you to maybe assume this Markovianity because it's not very real, né?
Yeah.
But at the same time, I agree that as there is a limitation regarding the not allowing the reappearing of the condition, because in particular cancer, for example, you can be 2 years because without appearing any action regarding the disease, and it reappears. So
yes, that's true. And I think that we could modify the model to allow it to reappear in the future. And at first, we only allow the diseases to appear, and then, for example, we modify it to also disappear in time. So I think that we can allow and modify the model in order to allow the model to reappear new or the same diseases.
It's not clear if in the database we have people with more than one episode of a disease. I don't know if we have that.
No, we don't know, for example, if a disease has been cured or no. We don't have such information.
yeah, thank you.
It's important to take into account that the database is a database from the economic department. So it has only a little information. So only the actions in the system, and in the action basically is the medical specialty.
Yes.
So it's the information we have is quite reduced. Yes. That's why we don't have diseases associated to the medical actions.
80 million records, then you think, you have everything there, you can do whatever you want,
but no.
I understand.
No. Okay. So thank you.
Thank you.